Her deaf, pregnant maid, invisible to the elite, becomes the center of a quiet conspiracy, until a fall changes everything, and something unexpected from nature decides to protect her. The morning was still stretching itself over the grey sky of Bayshore when Rachel Davis left the small annex where she lived, at the back of the fishing village. The sea breeze carried the salty aroma that had already become part of her essence, while her hands instinctively rested on her 5-month pregnant belly. That pregnancy was, at the same time, her comfort and her urgency. Her steps traversed the stone path with the familiarity of someone who had walked it hundreds of times. As she approached, the Blackwell mansion revealed itself imposingly at the top of the cliff, like a monument to the power that family exerted over the entire region. The colonial construction, surrounded by palm trees dancing with the sea breeze, hid more than it displayed. "Good morning, Rachel," the gardener greeted her with a wave, knowing that communication with her depended on gestures and expressions. Deaf since childhood, Rachel responded with a smile while her eyes, always attentive, registered every detail around her. For her, the world was a mosaic of vibrations, colors, and movements that her sensitivity deciphered with almost supernatural precision. Upon entering the house through the back door, as she always did, she noticed unusual activity. Staff members walked hurriedly, exchanging tense glances. In the kitchen, Sarah stirred a pot while repeatedly checking her cell phone. "Mr. Victor is nervous today," Sarah signed in rudimentary American Sign Language, with awkward movements that betrayed her recent learning. Rachel nodded, grateful for the cook's effort to communicate with her. Among all the employees, Sarah was the only one who tried to cross the barrier of silence, although something in her eyes always seemed to oscillate between kindness and apprehension. Heading to the library where she would begin her daily routine of cleaning and organizing, Rachel felt the weight of Ethan Blackwell's gaze, the patriarch's son, who observed her movement from the main staircase. There was something disturbing in the way he stared at her, a mixture of curiosity and uneasiness that made her uncomfortable. "My father wants to speak with you later," he said, articulating exaggeratedly as those who didn't understand that she could read lips perfectly often did. The message provoked a wave of apprehension. In almost 6 months working in that house, she was rarely called to Victor Blackwell's presence. The patriarch was an austere figure who commanded his business and his house with the same calculating coldness, keeping himself distant from employees as one who preserves an insurmountable boundary between classes. In the library, while organizing books, Rachel dropped a heavy encyclopedia behind the bookcase. When retrieving it, her fingers touched something different, an old black-and-white photograph that seemed to have slipped into that improbable hiding place. The image showed Victor alongside a man whose face immediately triggered an alarm in her memory: Warren Mitchell. That name was known throughout Bayshore, the businessman who had mysteriously disappeared 3 years ago, precisely when allegations of corruption against him were beginning to emerge. Turning the photograph over, she found a handwritten note, nearly erased: "Blue Coast Project, 2019. A chill ran down her spine when she registered the date, months after Warren's supposed disappearance. Carefully, she slid the photo into her apron pocket. Her instinct told her she had just found something too important to ignore, something that might explain the Blackwells' sudden wealth, the secret nighttime meetings, the politicians who arrived discreetly and left with briefcases full of documents. The scheduled meeting with Victor now gained a new layer of tension. Was it coincidence? Had he noticed her growing interest in the family's business, or was it about her advanced pregnancy, which would soon prevent her from fulfilling her usual duties? While these questions formed in her mind, Rachel noticed movement at the door. It was Sarah with a strange expression. "He wants to see you now," she signed, with gestures more rigid than normal. Rachel's heart accelerated. The photograph in her pocket seemed to burn, as if announcing the beginning of something that would forever change the course of her life in that small coastal town. With a last look at the organized library, she followed the sumptuous corridors toward the office of the man who commanded not only that mansion, but practically the entire power structure in Bayshore. What she didn't yet know was that each step brought her closer not just to Victor Blackwell, but to a labyrinth of secrets from which, once inside, it would be impossible to emerge unscathed. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. Victor Blackwell's office exuded power. Dark wood panels covered the walls, books that had probably never been opened, filled imposing shelves, and a panoramic window offered a privileged view of the Bayshore coast. At the center of this setting, seated behind a rosewood desk, Victor waited for her with an impenetrable expression. Rachel entered with measured steps, feeling the weight of the photograph hidden in her pocket. The Blackwell family patriarch was a 60-year-old man whose posture never betrayed any sign of fragility. His perfectly trimmed grey hair framed a face with hard features that rarely allowed itself the luxury of a genuine smile. "Sit down," he commanded, pointing to the chair in front of him, articulating slowly. She obeyed, keeping her hands resting on her prominent belly. Something in the office captured her attention. A painting on the wall behind Victor displayed a goat in a rocky landscape. The animal had disturbingly human eyes, as if observing the room with peculiar interest. "Your work has been satisfactory," Victor began, his lips moving with calculated precision that facilitated reading. "But your condition will soon become an impediment." He was referring to the pregnancy, naturally. Rachel nodded, already expecting this conversation, since her belly had become too evident to ignore. "I'll arrange a temporary replacement," he continued. "You may return after resolving your situation." The coldness with which he referred to the arrival of her child made something stir inside her. It wasn't just indignation, but a growing certainty that there was much more to this man than the surface revealed. "Meanwhile, I want you to organize some specific documents." He pushed a folder toward her. "They're old records from the Blue Coast Project. They need to be digitized and properly archived." The name made Rachel shudder internally. It was the same project mentioned in the photograph hidden in her pocket. Coincidence? Unlikely. Maintaining a neutral expression, she took the folder and nodded. When she was about to stand up, the office door opened abruptly. Ethan Blackwell entered, visibly agitated. There was an unmistakable smell of alcohol emanating from him, despite it still being morning. "Dad, we need to talk about the meeting with the mayor," he said, interrupting himself upon noticing Rachel's presence. "Oh, sorry. I didn't know you were busy." "We were just finishing," Victor responded coldly. "Ms. Davis was just leaving." Rachel stood up, holding the folder against her chest. As she passed by Ethan, she noticed his gaze sliding to the volume of the folder, as if trying to assess its contents. There was something predatory in those eyes. In the corridor, as she walked away, she heard the beginning of a heated discussion between father and son. Although she couldn't hear the words, the vibrations of raised voices reverberated through the walls, reaching her like waves of tension. In the empty library, Rachel carefully opened the folder. Inside, she found financial reports, maps of a coastal area, and contracts with various official signatures. Her heart almost stopped when her eyes again found Warren Mitchell's name on a document dated 6 months after his supposed disappearance. While discreetly photographing some pages with her cell phone, she felt a presence. She looked up to find Sarah standing at the door, observing her with an indecipherable expression. "What are you doing?" The cook signed, her gestures more fluid than usual. "Just organizing, as Mr. Blackwell asked," Rachel responded, her fingers forming the signs naturally. Sarah approached, looking at the document spread across the table. Her eyes lingered on one of the maps. "Be careful what you're looking for," she signed, with movements so quick they seemed intended to hide the message from any casual observer. "Not everything is where it appears to be." Before Rachel could respond, Sarah quickly left, leaving only the echo of her enigmatic words. That wasn't a warning from a zealous employee. It was the alert of someone who knew much more than she showed. That night, upon returning to her small annex in the fishing village, Rachel reviewed the photos she had taken of the documents. Among numbers, contractual clauses, and maps, the outline of something larger began to form, a scheme of appropriation of protected lands, falsification of environmental licenses, and a network of bribes that extended to the state government. The central piece seemed to be the Blue Coast Project, a luxury tourism development that would be built in a preservation area after a convenient change in local environmental legislation. While organizing her discoveries, Rachel felt the baby move in her womb. A wave of determination invaded her. It wasn't just for herself that she needed to unravel this plot. It was for her child, for their future, for a life free from the shadows that men like Victor Blackwell cast over small towns like Bayshore. A movement outside the window caught her attention. For an instant, she had the impression of seeing a male silhouette observing her house. When she approached to check, she found only the darkness of night, dotted by the distant lights of fishing boats returning to port. She decided to lock all doors and windows. The game she had begun to play was dangerous, and she had no illusions about that, but something inside her knew it was already too late to turn back. The hidden photograph and the documents she had seen were just the surface of something much deeper and darker. The following days passed in a tense normality. Rachel continued her duties at the Blackwell mansion, now with eyes more attentive to every movement, every document, every exchange of glances between members of the house. The Blue Coast Project folder remained in her possession, with the digitization task serving as the perfect pretext to meticulously examine its contents. It was during the staff lunch, 3 days later, that she noticed something different about Sarah. The cook seemed restless, checking her cell phone with abnormal frequency and exchanging quick glances with Eric, the family's driver, a quiet man who rarely interacted with other employees. Upon finishing the meal, Rachel was collecting her plate when she felt a paper being discreetly slid into her hand under the table. She put it in her pocket without showing any reaction, but her heart accelerated. Only when she was alone in the laundry room minutes later did she unfold the note. Back garden, 3 p.m. near the abandoned greenhouse. There was no signature, but the trembling handwriting suggested urgency. It could be a trap, but it could also be the key to understanding what was happening in that house. Risk and curiosity vied for space in her thoughts. At 3 in the afternoon, with the excuse of hanging sheets to dry, Rachel headed to the back garden. The abandoned greenhouse was in a wilder area of the property, where the terrain began to descend toward the cliff. It had been used by the former owner to cultivate rare orchids, but now served only as storage for broken gardening tools. As she approached, she saw no one. The sea breeze gently swayed the leaves of the bushes, creating dancing shadows on the ground. That's when she noticed movement inside the greenhouse, a male figure discreetly waving to her. With caution, she entered the stuffy space, where the dusty glass filtered the light, creating a dreamlike environment. To her surprise, she found Eric, the driver, accompanied by Sarah. Both seemed nervous, constantly looking at the door. "We know what you found," Sarah signed, to Rachel's astonishment. The cook's movements were now fluid, precise, of someone who had mastered sign language for years. "And we need your help." "Who are you, really?" asked Rachel, her fingers forming the signs with a mixture of distrust and curiosity. Eric stepped forward. To her surprise, he also began to sign with proficiency. "We're not just employees. We've been investigating Victor Blackwell for almost 2 years. I'm a journalist and Sarah works for the FBI." The revelation fell like a bomb. Rachel looked from one to the other, trying to process the information. The mansion was infiltrated, and she thought she was the only one observing from the shadows. "What do you want from me?" she asked, still cautious. "You found the photograph with Warren Mitchell, didn't you?" Sarah questioned. "And you saw the Blue Coast Project documents. You're putting the pieces together." Rachel nodded slowly. "Warren didn't disappear as everyone thinks," Eric continued. "He's in hiding, protected by us. He was our informant about Victor's schemes, but something went wrong. He had to fake his own disappearance when he discovered he would be silenced. But his signature on recent documents," Rachel began. "Forged," Sarah cut in. "Victor uses Warren's name to continue operating illegal businesses. A supposedly missing man can't contest contracts, you understand?" The pieces were beginning to fit together. The Blackwell's sudden empire, the lands acquired under suspicious circumstances, the licenses obtained with surprising ease. "Why are you telling me this?" asked Rachel, with a mixture of curiosity and distrust. "Because Victor suspects us," Eric responded. "We're being watched. But you're invisible to him. A deaf, pregnant employee whom he completely underestimates. You can access places and information that we can no longer reach." Rachel let out a bitter laugh. It was ironic how her condition, so often a reason for discrimination, now became her greatest advantage. "We're close to gathering enough evidence to bring down not just Victor, but the entire network behind him," Sarah explained. "But we need access to the safe in his office." "What safe?" asked Rachel, surprised. "Behind the goat painting," Eric responded. "That's where the original documents are, the evidence we need, and you're the only one who can reach them without raising suspicions." The proposal was audacious and dangerous. Rachel thought about her baby, about the security she had sought when accepting that job. But she also thought about the hidden photograph, the suspicious documents, the constant feeling that something very wrong was happening in that mansion. "And if I refuse?" she asked, her fingers forming the signs firmly. Sarah and Eric's gazes met briefly, laden with concern. "Then we'll have to find another way," Sarah responded. "But keep in mind that Victor must already be suspicious of your interest. Curious people don't tend to last long around him." A shiver ran down Rachel's spine. The veiled threat was clear. She was too involved to simply back away. "I need to think," she signed finally. "We don't have much time," Eric warned. "There are rumors that the Blue Coast project will enter the implementation phase in days. When that happens, the evidence will begin to disappear." Upon leaving the greenhouse, Rachel felt the weight of an impossible decision on her shoulders. The afternoon advanced over Bayshore, tinting the sky with orange tones that reflected on the agitated sea. Back at the mansion, she found Ethan Blackwell on the veranda, with a glass of whiskey in hand, observing her with renewed interest. "Strolling through the gardens, Rachel?" he asked, articulating exaggeratedly as he always did. There was something in his gaze that suggested he knew more than he showed. She merely smiled politely and continued on her way. The sensation of being surrounded on all sides grew with each moment. That night, lying in her bed in the small annex of the fishing village, Rachel contemplated her options while caressing her belly. The pieces of the board had been revealed, but the game was just beginning, and she needed to decide what move to make next. The decision didn't come with the dawn, as Rachel had hoped. Instead, it arrived unexpectedly, during a scene she witnessed the following morning. While organizing books in the library, she saw through the window Victor Blackwell receiving a group of men in impeccable suits. Among them, she recognized the mayor of Bayshore and the State Secretary of Environmental Affairs. The smiles and cordial handshakes contrasted with the expressions they assumed when they entered the office and closed the doors. It was at that moment that Rachel knew she couldn't simply ignore what was happening. Not for herself, but for the town that would be irremediably transformed by those men's plans. That afternoon, during her break, she sent a text message to the number Eric had given her. "I'm in. What do I need to do?" The response came almost instantly. "Tonight, charity event. Everyone will be distracted." Rachel knew the event well. The Blackwell mansion would receive dozens of illustrious guests for a charity dinner, an annual tradition that served more as a demonstration of power and influence than as genuine social concern. It would be the perfect opportunity to access Victor's office without raising suspicions. By nightfall, the mansion was already pulsing with the presence of guests. Women in gala dresses, men in expensive suits, champagne flutes, and falsely animated conversations echoed through the main hall. As part of the service team, Rachel circulated discreetly behind the scenes, invisible to the eyes of Bayshore's high society. Using as a pretext the need to fetch more linen napkins from the storage room near the office, she moved away from the bustle of the party. The corridor that led to the private wing of the house was deserted, illuminated only by the soft light of golden wall sconces. With her heart racing, Rachel checked once more if there was no one nearby before turning the doorknob of the office. To her surprise, it was unlocked, a sign that Victor, in his arrogance, would never imagine that someone would dare enter his private sanctuary during his own party. The office was in twilight, with only the moonlight crossing the wide windows, creating elongated shadows of the imposing furniture. Her eyes immediately sought the goat painting behind the desk. There it was, with those disturbingly human eyes that seemed to follow her. She approached and carefully removed the painting from the wall. As Eric had said, a digital safe was embedded in the masonry. The problem was the password. No one had mentioned how she would overcome this barrier. She tried the date she had seen in the Blue Coast Project documents. No success. She experimented with Victor's birthday, which she knew from having prepared a discreet celebration months before. Nothing. Her mind was racing in search of possibilities when she heard a noise. Footsteps in the corridor. Quickly, she replaced the painting and hid behind a heavy curtain. The door opened, and Rachel held her breath. Through the gaps in the fabric, she saw Ethan Blackwell enter, accompanied by a woman she didn't know. Both seemed tense. "We need to be quick," said Ethan, heading directly to the safe. "My father will notice our absence." The woman, about 40, with an elegant posture, anxiously watched the door. "Are you sure you want to do this, Ethan?" she asked. "Your father will never forgive you." "I don't care about his forgiveness anymore, Heather," he responded bitterly, removing the painting. "What he's doing goes far beyond the limits, even for me." With precise movements, Ethan entered a sequence on the safe's panel. The soft click indicated the combination was correct. Rachel observed attentively, memorizing each number. 197325. "Here. They are," he said, removing a folder from inside. "All the original documents of the project, including transfers to offshore accounts." Heather took the folder, quickly leafing through its contents. "It's more serious than we imagined," she murmured. "There are names of judges here, police chiefs, even an appellate judge." "A complete network," Ethan agreed. "My father isn't just a corrupt businessman, Heather. He's the architect of an entire system." The woman raised her eyes to Ethan, her face a mask of concern. "You understand that once we hand this over, there's no going back? Your father will go to prison, the company will be dismantled." "And me?" Ethan completed with a dry laugh. "I'll probably end up behind bars too, but I'm tired, Heather. Tired of being complicit, of pretending I don't see what's happening. That preservation area, you know what it means to the town, to the people who live off fishing." The comment surprised Rachel. She had never imagined that Victor's spoiled and troubled son could have any concern for the social impacts of the family's business. "We need to go," Heather insisted, storing the documents in her elegant bag. "Your contact in the FBI is waiting for us at the agreed point in an hour." The two headed for the door, but before leaving, Ethan paused for a moment, looking at the office as if saying goodbye. "I spent my entire life trying to impress him. You know," he said with a choked voice, "how ironic that the only act that really matters is betraying him." When the door closed, Rachel remained motionless for a few minutes, processing what she had just witnessed. Everything had changed. Ethan and this Heather were one step ahead, taking exactly the evidence she had come to seek. But to whom? Was it really the FBI or another player in that complex board? She left her hiding place and approached the safe again. She entered the sequence she had memorized, and to her satisfaction, the door opened. Ethan, in his haste, hadn't closed it completely. Inside, there were still some documents he hadn't taken, property records, detailed maps, and, to her surprise, a folder with her own name. Upon opening it, her blood froze. There was a complete investigation about her. Copies of her documents, medical records, photos of her in the fishing village, and more disturbing, detailed reports of her movements in recent weeks. Victor knew. He knew she was investigating, observing, connecting the dots. And there was something else, a series of old photographs of her mother, already deceased, with a man Rachel immediately recognized, Warren Mitchell. The world seemed to spin around her as the truth emerged from the shadows like a predator lying in wait. Her past and the present were intertwined in ways she had never imagined, and the puzzle she was trying to assemble was much larger and more personal than she had suspected. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. The photographs trembled in Rachel's hands as she absorbed the revelation that had just collapsed upon her shoulders. The images showed her mother, young, smiling, alive, alongside Warren Mitchell at different moments. In some, they appeared in formal meetings. In others, they shared moments of evident intimacy. In the last photo of the sequence, her mother held a baby in her arms. There was no doubt. It was Rachel herself, newborn. A note attached to the photographs, handwritten, with the cold and precise calligraphy she recognized as Victor's, said only, "Leverage point if necessary." She had been a piece in the game from the beginning, without even knowing it. The distant sound of the party continued to echo through the mansion, but for Rachel the world had silenced in a way that not even her deafness could explain. Quickly, she photographed all the documents with her cell phone and reorganized the safe, leaving everything as she had found it. There was no time to fully digest what she had discovered. She needed to leave before her absence was noticed. Upon returning to the hall with the napkins she had used as an excuse, her eyes met Sarah's across the room. The cook, serving canapés, to the guests gave her a questioning look. Rachel gave a slight nod, indicating she had gotten what she was looking for. The rest of the night passed in a fog of mechanical activities, serving, smiling, collecting empty glasses, all while her mind tried to process the implications of her discovery. Warren Mitchell, the supposedly missing man, the secret informant, Victor's enemy. Could he be her father? Hours later, when the last guests had already departed and the mansion finally quieted, Rachel was preparing to leave when Victor Blackwell appeared in the service corridor. His face, normally controlled, displayed a contained fury that made her blood freeze. "My son thinks he can betray me," he said, articulating each word with threatening clarity. "He thinks some documents are enough to bring me down." Rachel maintained an impassive face, as if she didn't fully comprehend what he was saying. "The problem with traitors, Miss Davis," he continued, slowly approaching, "is that they rarely act alone. There are always accomplices, aren't there?" His gaze descended to the pocket of her apron, where she had stored the photographs she had taken with her cell phone. For a terrifying instant, Rachel thought he knew that somehow he had observed her. "Did Mr. Ethan leave early?" she asked, feigning innocence, her fingers forming the signs while she articulated the words. Victor narrowed his eyes, studying her like a predator evaluating its prey. "You're smarter than you appear, aren't you?" he commented, his gaze alternating between anger and something close to reluctant admiration. "Perhaps you really are your father's daughter." The confirmation, even if indirect, hit Rachel like a physical blow. Her suspicions were true, but there was no time to process this revelation as Victor's face transformed again into a mask of calculating coldness. "Go home, Miss Davis. Tomorrow we'll have much to discuss about your future in this house." The veiled threat hung in the air between them. Rachel nodded politely and headed for the back exit, feeling the weight of his gaze on her back. Only when she was far from the property, walking along the trail that led to the fishing village, did she allow herself to tremble. Instead of heading to her annex, however, she diverted to the deserted beach. The full moon illuminated the sand and the agitated sea, creating a scene of wild beauty that contrasted with the storm in her mind. It was there, seated on an abandoned log, that she felt the presence of someone approaching. She turned quickly, alert, only to find Sarah. "What happened in there?" the cook signed, sitting beside her. "You seemed disturbed when you left." Rachel hesitated for a moment before showing the photographs she had registered on her cell phone. Sarah's eyes widened as she scrolled through the images. "You didn't?" "No?" Rachel asked. "We suspected there was a personal connection," Sarah responded, her gestures demonstrating genuine surprise. "Warren mentioned a woman he had loved in the past, but never said he had a daughter. Why did he abandon me?" Rachel couldn't avoid the painful questioning that emerged from her wounded heart. "It wasn't abandonment," Sarah signed emphatically. "Your mother pushed him away when she realized where his business was going. She didn't want you to grow up in that world. And now I'm exactly in the middle of it," Rachel concluded bitterly. "There's more," Sarah continued. "The plan has changed. Ethan Blackwell took documents from the safe and is taking them to someone. We don't know if we can trust him. Heather, Rachel signed. He was with a woman named Heather. They talked about delivering the documents to the FBI. Sarah's face paled. Heather Morgan? Are you sure? Rachel nodded, intrigued by the reaction. She's not FBI, Sarah signed quickly. She's the lawyer for Richard Ferreira, Victor's biggest rival in real estate business. If the documents fall into her hands, they'll never reach the authorities, Rachel completed, understanding the gravity of the situation. We need to intercept them, Sarah decided. Eric is waiting with the car on the secondary road. Can you take us there? Rachel hesitated, instinctively caressing her belly. Each step involved her more deeply in a dangerous plot. But now it wasn't just about exposing Victor or protecting Bayshore. It was about discovering the truth about her own past, about the man who could be her father. Let's go, she finally signed, standing up with determination. As they followed, the beach toward the road, Rachel cast a final glance at the Blackwell mansion atop the cliff. The lights still on projected elongated shadows over the grounds, like dark fingers trying to reach her. The sensation that something crucial was about to happen made her heart beat faster. What she didn't yet know was that as they walked, a pair of eyes was watching them from the shadows. Someone whose role in that story was about to be revealed, in a dramatic way. The secondary road serpentined between the dense vegetation, occasionally revealing glimpses of the agitated sea below the cliff. Eric waited in a simple car, engine running, tense expression. When he spotted Rachel and Sarah emerging from the trail, he made an urgent gesture for them to enter. Heather and Ethan are meeting someone at the Overlook Hotel, Sarah quickly signed to Rachel as Eric drove off. We have about 20 minutes to intercept them. The mentioned hotel was at the other end of Bayshore, a discreet establishment mainly frequented by businessmen visiting the region. The fastest route was via the coastal road, passing dangerously close to the Blackwell mansion. Rachel observed the nocturnal landscape sliding past the window, her thoughts a storm of doubts and revelations. Her cell phone vibrated, a text message from an unknown number. Don't trust anyone, not even those who say they're helping you. W.Y. Warren. Her heart accelerated. Could it really be him, her father, trying to warn her, or was it a trap from Victor? She put the phone away without showing the message to the others, a seed of doubt planted in her chest. The car was rounding a sharp curve when the headlights illuminated a vehicle stopped on the shoulder. A black Audi that Rachel immediately recognized as belonging to Ethan Blackwell. Eric reduced speed, parking a few meters ahead. Stay here, he ordered, pulling a gun from the glove compartment. The sight of the pistol alarmed Rachel. Until then, she hadn't imagined the situation involved weapons. We need to be prepared, Sarah explained, noticing her expression. Heather isn't the type of person who gives up easily. Eric carefully approached the Audi, only to discover it was empty. The driver's door was ajar, and there was a folder fallen on the ground beside it. The documents Ethan had taken from the safe were scattered across the road as if someone had left in a hurry, abandoning everything. Rachel was observing through the car window when she noticed movement in the vegetation at the edge of the cliff. A male figure was staggering toward the edge, pursued by another, shorter silhouette. There, she tapped Sarah's shoulder, pointing. The two immediately left the car, heading in the indicated direction. Eric, noticing the movement, ran to catch up with them, hastily storing the documents in his jacket. As they approached, the scene became clearer under the moonlight. Ethan Blackwell was dangerously close to the edge of the cliff, with Heather Morgan in front of him. Something gleamed in her hand, a gun. You don't understand, Heather. Ethan's voice reached them, fragmented by the sea breeze. It's not just about the business, he crossed the line. The documents, Ethan, Heather demanded, her voice as sharp as steel. Where are the documents you took from the safe? In the car, he responded, taking another step back, dangerously close to the edge. But you won't deliver them to Ferreira. That wasn't the agreement. Heather laughed, a cold and calculating sound. Agreement? You really believed I wanted justice? Richard will pay a fortune for these proofs, and then bury them so deep that no one will ever find them. Business continues, just under new management. Ethan's face contorted in a mask of betrayal and disgust. "You're just like him," he murmured. "Just like my father." At that moment, Eric emerged from the vegetation, gun in hand. "FBI, lower the—" "Weapon, Heather." The lawyer turned abruptly, surprised, but didn't drop the pistol. Her calculating gaze quickly assessed the situation. "Too late," she said with a cold smile. "The documents have already been digitized and sent. You've lost." It was at that exact moment that Victor Blackwell appeared from the other side of the clearing, accompanied by two threatening-looking men. His normally controlled face was transformed by fury. "You ungrateful traitor," he spat, advancing toward his son. "You think you can destroy everything I've built?" The next moment happened in slow motion for Rachel. Ethan, startled by his father's sudden arrival, took a step back. The terrain, damp from the sea spray, gave way beneath his feet. His arms flailed in the air as he tried to regain balance, but gravity was already pulling him toward the fall. Rachel instinctively ran, extending her hand to grab him. Her fingers managed to touch his for a brief instant before Ethan disappeared into the darkness below, his screams silent to her ears, but his expression of terror forever etched in her memory. "No!" Victor's cry cut through the night as he advanced to the edge, looking down in despair. Heather took advantage of the chaos to flee, but Eric was faster, bringing her down with a precise movement. Victor's henchman, momentarily paralyzed by shock, didn't react when Sarah drew her own weapon, also identifying herself as a federal agent. Rachel remained at the edge of the cliff, her body trembling, eyes fixed on the abyss that had just swallowed. Ethan Blackwell. A few meters away, Victor had fallen to his knees, his face a mask of devastation that completely transformed the powerful businessman. "My son," he murmured, like a lost child. "My son." It was then that the world around Rachel seemed to decelerate. Victor raised his eyes to her, and what she saw there was no longer the calculating manipulator, but a broken man who had just lost everything that really mattered. For a brief moment, something close to understanding passed between them. Then, like a storm that finally breaks after days of pressure, he stood up with a primitive roar. His eyes now overflowed with incandescent hatred. "You," he accused, advancing toward Rachel. "You made this happen." Before Eric or Sarah could intervene, Victor grabbed her by the shoulders. Rachel felt his hands like claws, the pure hatred emanating from him in almost tangible waves. "All because of your father," he vociferated, shaking her. "Warren haunting me even through his daughter." The explicit confession of the truth she had only suspected came at the worst possible moment. Struggling to free herself, Rachel felt the slippery ground beneath her feet. The same treacherous edge that had taken Ethan now threatened to swallow her. Everything happened in seconds, Eric and Sarah running in her direction, the henchman finally reacting, generating more confusion, and Victor, blinded by hatred and grief, pushing her with enough force to launch her into the same darkness that had engulfed his son moments before. The fall seemed endless, the wind lashing her face, the starry sky spinning above, the primal instinct to protect her womb with her arms, confused thoughts of her baby, of Warren, of the past and the future she might no longer have mixed in her mind. Then came the impact. Not against the rock she expected, but against the dense vegetation that grew on the slope of the cliff. Branches broke under her weight, attenuating the fall, while her body slid down a less steep incline. When she finally stopped, she was bruised, bloodied, but alive. Consciousness returned to Rachel in disconnected fragments. First came the pain, pulsating and comprehensive, which seemed to emanate from every cell of her body. Then the damp sensation of the earth beneath her back, the pungent smell of crushed vegetation, the metallic taste of blood on her lips. Finally, vision. The starry sky filtered through the twisted branches that had cushioned her fall. Her first instinct was to bring her hands to her belly. She felt movement. Her baby was still alive, fighting alongside her. Tears of relief ran down her dirty face as she tried to assess her situation. She was trapped on a kind of natural plateau on the slope of the cliff. Above, the edge from which she had fallen seemed impossibly distant. Below, a few more meters of decline, before the rocks that met the agitated sea. The full moon illuminated enough to reveal there was no safe path in any direction. She tried to move, and a sharp pain traversed her right leg. It didn't seem broken, but a deep cut was bleeding abundantly. Using torn fabric from her blouse, she improvised a tourniquet to staunch the bleeding. The voices above were only indistinct vibrations to her deaf ears, but she could imagine the chaos that had followed her fall. Victor probably believed she was dead, like his son. The idea brought a strange strategic advantage. The element of surprise could be her only weapon when all this was over. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Pain distorted her perception of time. She was exhausted, dehydrated, and the cold of dawn was beginning to infiltrate her clothes, damp with sweat and blood. She needed to find strength to survive until daybreak, when perhaps she could be seen by some fisherman. That's when she realized she wasn't alone. A presence moved in the nearby shadows, startling her. Rachel tried to back away, ignoring the excruciating pain, desperately searching for some improvised weapon. Her fingers found only earth and roots. From the darkness emerged the silhouette of an animal, a dark-coated goat whose eyes reflected the moonlight like two silver coins. The animal approached calmly, showing no fear, until it stopped a few steps from where she had fallen. For a surreal moment, Rachel remembered the painting in Victor's office, the goat with strangely human eyes that hid the safe of secrets. The coincidence seemed too significant to be just chance, as if some greater force was intertwining the threads of her story. The animal came closer, curiously sniffing her face. There was something comforting about its presence, an unexpected company in that moment of complete solitude. Rachel extended her trembling hand and touched the rough coat, feeling the warmth of the animal's body. The goat lay down beside her, as if understanding her need for warmth and comfort. The situation was so absurd that even in her state of pain and exhaustion, Rachel couldn't avoid a weak smile. Surviving a deadly fall to be consoled by a wild goat, it seemed the kind of story fishermen would tell for generations. Embracing the animal, she managed to find a bit of warmth during the coldest hours of dawn. Her mind, although clouded by pain, continued working, putting together the pieces of the events that had led her there. Warren Mitchell was her father. Victor Blackwell was his declared enemy. Her mother had kept this secret her entire life, trying to protect her from a world of corruption and betrayals. And now, pregnant and wounded, she carried the same protective instinct for the next generation. When the first lights of morning began to tint the horizon, the goat suddenly stood up, calling her attention with a movement of its head. The animal began to follow an almost invisible path between the dense vegetation. It stopped a few meters ahead, looking back as if expecting her to follow. With agonizing effort, Rachel managed to crawl in the indicated direction. The trail was narrow and steep, but the goat seemed to know it perfectly, patiently waiting each time she needed to rest. After what seemed an eternity of pain and effort, the vegetation opened to reveal a small hidden cove, accessible only by sea or by the almost invisible path she had just traversed. On the beach of clear sand, an old fishing boat was anchored, and a middle-aged man was organizing nets. The goat quickly descended, attracting the fisherman's attention. When the man raised his eyes and saw Rachel emerging, staggering from the vegetation, his expression transformed into shock. He immediately ran in her direction, supporting her before she collapsed on the sand. Her last conscious thought before succumbing to exhaustion was that the goat had disappeared as mysteriously as it had appeared. When she awoke again, she was in a simple but clean room, lying on a comfortable bed. Her wounds had been cleaned and improvised bandages covered the deepest cuts. An elderly woman with a sun-marked face and calloused hands was adjusting a cold compress on her forehead. "You're safe," the woman signed in fluent ASL to Rachel's surprise. "My husband found you this morning." "The goat," Rachel began, her fingers forming the signs with difficulty. An enigmatic smile appeared on the wrinkled face of the elderly woman. "Animals always know who needs help," she responded simply. Throughout the day, as she recovered her strength, Rachel discovered she was in the house of Joseph and Martha, a couple of fishermen who lived away from the main village. By coincidence, or perhaps not, They had been close friends of her mother in the past. "We knew your father too," Martha revealed, while applying a homemade remedy to the abrasions. "Warren was a good man before getting involved with the Blackwells." "Is he alive?" Rachel asked directly, her eyes fixed on the elderly woman's. Martha hesitated for a moment, as if evaluating how much she could reveal. "Yes," she finally answered, "but it's better that Victor continues to believe you didn't survive, at least until we're sure it's safe." The news was simultaneously comforting and alarming. If Warren was really alive and acting in the shadows, it meant the battle against the Blackwells continued, and Rachel now had become a central piece in this power game. Later that day, while observing the sea through the window, she felt a presence behind her. She turned to find a tall man with grey hair and intense eyes that seemed a reflection of her own. Warren Mitchell had finally emerged from the shadows to meet his daughter. The silence between father and daughter was as dense as the fog that occasionally covered the coast of Bayshore. Warren Mitchell remained at the door as if awaiting permission to enter her space, a belated respect for boundaries he had never had the chance to establish. Rachel studied him intensely, looking for traces in his face that she might recognize in herself. She found many: the same almond-shaped eyes, the same eyebrow shape, even the way his lips compressed in moments of tension. It was like looking at a future version of herself, if she had been born male and lived under the weight of secrets for decades. "May I come in?" he signed in perfect ASL, surprising her again. She nodded, still processing the reality of that encounter. Warren sat on the edge of the bed, maintaining a respectful distance. His hands, aged but strong, rested restlessly on his knees. "Where do I begin?" His fingers formed the signs with natural fluency. "How does one explain a lifetime of absence?" "With the truth," Rachel responded simply. "Complete. No more secrets." He agreed, an ancient weariness evident in his eyes. "I met your mother, Claire, when we were young idealists," he began. "I was an environmental engineer. She worked with fishing communities. We fell in love while fighting together to protect the coastal preservation areas." His fingers formed the words with a mixture of nostalgia and regret. "When she got pregnant, we were happy, planning our life together. But I had already begun investigating some irregularities in real estate projects in the region. I found evidence that businessmen like Victor were bribing authorities to obtain illegal licenses." Warren paused, his eyes momentarily lost in painful memories. "They offered me partnership instead of silence. I accepted, naively thinking I could change the system from within, ensure that at least some environmental standards would be respected." The confession hung in the air between them, the moment when the idealist began his fall. "Your mother realized before I did that I was being corrupted," he continued. "She tried to warn me, but I was blinded by the possibilities, the money, the power. When you were born, she gave me an ultimatum: either leave that world or lose you both. And you chose business," Rachel concluded, the hurt of a lifetime condensed in those words. Warren lowered his head, accepting the judgment. "Yes, the biggest mistake of my life. When I finally realized what I had lost, it was too late." Claire prevented any contact, moved away, ensured I couldn't find you. "But you knew about me," Rachel signed, not as a question but as an accusation. "You knew I existed." "I always knew," he confirmed. "I followed your life from a distance. I knew about your deafness, about your struggles, about your talents. When your mother passed away 5 years ago, I thought about looking for you, but I was already in the middle of another battle." "Against Victor," she deduced. Warren nodded, his countenance hardening. "I discovered he was using my name to continue operating increasingly audacious schemes. I faked my own disappearance to investigate him from the shadows, gathering enough evidence to bring down not just him, but the entire corruption network behind him. And then I appeared at the mansion," Rachel completed. "Imagine my shock at discovering that my own daughter unknowingly had entered the wolf's den," he signed, with a sad smile. "I almost compromised the entire operation that first day when I saw you through the security monitors we had hacked. The anonymous notes, were they yours?" "Some of them. Others came from allies inside the mansion. Eric is trustworthy, a real federal agent. Sarah, too. But there were other players. You didn't meet." Rachel absorbed each revelation like pieces of a complex puzzle, that finally began to form a coherent picture. "And now?" she asked. "Victor believes me dead, like Ethan?" A shadow crossed Warren's face. "Ethan survived," he revealed. "Like you, he was injured in the fall but was found by fishermen. He's under police protection at the regional hospital." The news brought unexpected relief. Despite everything, Rachel didn't wish death upon Victor's son. "As for Victor," Warren continued, "he's cornered. The documents Ethan took from the safe were recovered by Eric before Heather could deliver them to Ferreira. With that evidence and the files you photographed, we have enough to expose the entire operation." "Why didn't you do it before?" Rachel questioned, a hint of resentment in her gestures. Warren sighed, the weight of years of planning evident in his weary countenance. "We needed irrefutable evidence, clear connections between all those involved. If we hit only Victor, another would take his place. We wanted to dismantle the entire system." At that moment, the baby moved vigorously in Rachel's womb. She placed her hand on her belly, an instinctive gesture of protection that didn't go unnoticed by Warren. His eyes softened at the sight of his pregnant daughter. "My grandchild," he signed, with an implicit question in his gaze. "Or granddaughter," Rachel responded. "I don't know yet." A silence laden with possibilities hung between them. 3. Generations connected in a moment of truth after so much time of secrets. "What happens now?" she finally asked. "Now you rest and recover," Warren responded. "As for the rest, Victor will be arrested in the next few hours. Heather, too. The operation is being coordinated by the federal agent Eric contacted. The documents will be made public, and the Blue Coast project will never leave the drawing." Bored. The victory seemed almost anticlimactic after all they had been through. Rachel expected to feel a wave of satisfaction, but what came was something more complex, a relief mixed with sadness for the lost years, for the affected lives, for relationships that could have been different. "And what about us?" she asked, the true heart of the question. Warren hesitated, clearly unprepared for that direct question, despite his decades of strategies and plans. "That depends on you," he answered honestly. "I have no right to demand a place in your life, after so long. But if you allow me, I would like to get to know my daughter and someday my grandchild." The vulnerability of that man who had spent years in the shadows, orchestrating a complex operation against one of the most powerful businessmen in the region, moved Rachel in a way she hadn't expected. There was so much of herself in him. The determination, the ability to observe and connect dots, the resilience. "It will take time," she signed, neither promising nor refusing. Warren nodded, accepting those uncertain terms as more than he deserved. That night, after he had left, Rachel was observing the starry sky through the window when Martha entered the room bringing tea. "Did you find the answers you were looking for?" the elderly woman asked, sitting beside her. "Some," Rachel responded. "There's still much I need to understand." Martha smiled with the wisdom of years. "You know what your mother always said, that some questions don't have simple answers. Life isn't a puzzle with pieces that fit perfectly. It's more like a mosaic, made of imperfect fragments that, together, create something beautiful." Rachel reflected on those words as she slowly drank the tea. In a way, that's what had happened to her. Fragments of truth, revealed in unexpected moments, through unlikely people, even a mysterious goat that had appeared to save her. 3. Months later, in the first hours of a clear morning, Rachel gave birth to a healthy baby girl in the same room of Martha and Joseph's house. She decided to name her Claire, in homage to the mother who had fought so hard to protect her. When the little one was a week old, Rachel took her to the deserted beach where Joseph's boat usually anchored. Warren was waiting there with a bouquet of wildflowers in his hands and barely contained tears in his eyes. "I want you to meet your granddaughter," Rachel signed, placing the baby in his trembling arms. As she observed father and granddaughter meeting, Rachel spotted, atop a nearby rock formation, the unmistakable silhouette of a goat. The animal seemed to observe them with that strange intensity she already knew, before disappearing among the rocks. On the horizon, the Blackwell mansion, now closed and awaiting judicial decision, seemed smaller and less threatening under the sunlight. The empire built on corruption and betrayals had collapsed, but from the ashes new possibilities were born. The truth, however painful it might be, had finally liberated not just an entire town, but also the hearts of those who for so long had lived in silence. Rachel smiled, turning her attention to her daughter and the future that now opened before her, a future built not on secrets,